Hey BK with Ofer Cohen.
There's nothing more exciting to me than seeing, people flow into the Brooklyn Navy Yard through their gates in ways that they hadn't, since the mid-'60s. And same thing at Industry City when you see masses of folks coming down the hill, from Sunset Park and the surrounding areas.
You're listening to Hey BK. I'm Ofer Cohen. Today, I talked to Andrew Kimball, Chief Executive of Industry City, the largest privately owned industrial complex in New York City on the Sunset Park waterfront. Totaling 6 million square feet, the site is being transformed by Andrew and his partners into an eclectic mixed-use project. But before taking on Industry City, Andrew was at the helm of the Brooklyn Navy Yard Development Corporation. Like Industry City, the new Navy Yard signifies a new era for innovation and manufacturing on the Brooklyn waterfront. Are you proud?
Incredibly proud, incredibly appreciative of the time I spent there.
We've already devoted 3 Hey BK episodes to the Navy Yard. David Belt of New Lab, David Ehrenberg, who took over for Andrew, and Doug Steiner of Steiner Studios have all been on the show. Now Andrew Kimball, a key force behind the Brooklyn transformation.
You're generous at giving me that credit. The truth is that, one of the great stories of the Navy Yard is the series of competent and strong executive directors, presidents, and then a really strong board. The governance piece, you can't overstate the importance of the governance piece. People who both understood real estate really well and were very hard-headed and really grilled us on every single deal.
Innovations to modernize Industry City began when Jamestown and Partners took over 5 years ago. With Andrew at the helm, the tremendous amount of capital, thoughtfulness, and hard work is starting to pay off, with industry and workers coming back and activating the area. I asked Andrew, where do you start?
It was tough the first couple of years. I mean, you're looking at a site where the electric, barely worked. We had blackouts every summer. The first 3 summers I was there. I mean, that's not a happy day when you're moving in companies that are tech reliant, whether they're manufacturing or they're designing or they're, tech office, and you have an outage. I mean, that's not a happy moment as landlord. So 144 elevators that needed to be upgraded, 17,000 windows that needed to be replaced. The list just went on and on and on. And you're exactly right. Where do you start? Look, we tried to be very disciplined. Obviously, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out, hey, one of the great competitive advantages we have there is only 1 block from the subway, the NR and the D, with very fast access to the rest of Brooklyn and to Manhattan. So, of course, you want to start with those buildings closest to the subway, the finger buildings, as we call them, that tend to be a little narrower than the buildings along 39th Street. Those are much bigger floor plates. So we tried to stay focused there. But then, of course, the Brooklyn Nets came along in the first year and said, hey, we want to build a $50 million practice facility on your roof. So we were delighted to try to make that work. And they're there, but they needed to be in the buildings along 39th Street because of the size of the footprint. So that, that was a pleasant distraction to have, but a distraction. It's now safe for pedestrians. And so that was number one. Number two was... And others had this idea but never executed, creating a common walkway through the middle of all the buildings that we call Innovation Alley, that really created a campus feel, connected the buildings. Otherwise, you had to walk the full block length to get around these buildings. And that's been incredible in terms of creating more food amenities, what I like to call maker retail. So, the hat maker, where you can actually see the goods getting made, and buy it. And that piece has been so successful. We're now looking at creating more common area, publicly accessible area where you walk up to a second floor and have more, maker space, the glass blower, the woodworker, the guitar maker, those sorts of amenities. And then the third, I would say, is the courtyards. I mean, we're blessed to have these beautiful courtyards. When those buildings were built, 1890 to 1910, by Irving T. Bush, who sort of Andrew Carnegie-type character, who built, really the nation's first intermodal center. So goods would come in by ship. First it was coffee, then bananas, a lot of garment. They get off the ships, they get on rail, they come into the courtyards. They'd go up in the buildings, they'd get stored, they'd get worked on, they'd go out on the streets. Those days are over of that, use of rail, so the courtyards, remain. And when we got there, most of them were overgrown with weeds 10 feet tall. And we've now renovated 3 of them, created 5 acres of publicly accessible space. And, that's incredibly satisfying. It's a place where the tenants congregate. It's a place where the community comes down to hang out. And, now if you come down to Industry City on the weekend, there are, 15 to 20,000 people there every weekend, and that's only growing.
I was there a couple of weeks ago at the ABC store, and that was amazing. To see that corner of 39th Street activated this way was, for me, like a big moment, because I've seen, every few months, I've seen everything you've been describing, the sidewalks and the loading docks and the inner courtyards and the retail activation. But that corner of 39th Street, for me, was a big moment of like, wow.
And it's a challenging intersection from a transportation point of view. You've got the ramp coming off the BQE. You've got 2nd and 39th meeting. You've got a street that probably hasn't been touched in 120 years. So that's one of the key parts of the infrastructure work that's going to happen down there.
That's going to be some pedestrian.
Improve pedestrian, improve lights, improve safety. The Greenway will run along 2nd Avenue and then down 39th Street. So that will be terrific in terms of bike access.
You make it sound so easy now, 5 years into the job.
There were days in the first couple of years, forgetting the blackouts, like you'd come down to the ground floor at lunch and there's nobody there. And,
right.
Or you'd come on the weekend and, the only way we'd get people there is to have a specific event to draw people there. And that was stressful. Will they ever come? I think we've passed that moment. Like, we're on the map. People certainly know what Industry City is. Funny story, obviously we've done a lot in terms of events and marketing to try to encourage people to come down there. But Lyft has done an interesting advertising campaign. This was well before they took over Motivate, our tenant. But I think maybe 6-8 months ago, a billboard went up in Chelsea that was, basically a really cool sort of cartoony image of Industry City, and essentially the message was Lyft can get you there.
Industry City is in the middle of a rezoning process to support the commercial growth and activate more retail around the area. What's the vision? Like, closing your eyes and thinking like, what would Industry City be in like 7-8 years?
Yeah, I mean, look, ULURP is challenging, as you know. It takes a very, very long time. Zoning is really outdated in New York. I mean, it was designed in the 50s and 60s for things that, for a very different economy that said we've got to keep things apart and separate. The noxious uses need to be way over here, the less noxious uses over here, the office over here, and the residential way far away. And, we all know those things can mix a lot more. There's obviously going to be no residential in our project, and that's core. That's something the community wanted. But there should be more academic, as an example. And so, under the M3 zoning, we're very constricted there. We can do some narrow vocational academic collaborations, and we're doing that with CUNY City Tech. We're doing it with St. Francis now and an innovation space and through internships. But if any one of those schools said, hey, we love being embedded here. This is great for our students. We want a place where they could see stepping out of school and starting their own business. And more schools are coming to us with that. But we can't have classroom space under the M3 zoning. So we want the flexibility to add to the vocational, to the maker spaces, up to 600,000 square feet of classroom space. We think that's fundamental. It's sort of that great intersection of good public policy, right? Really good for the city that the academic sector is growing. Really good that those students are being connected to those jobs, and good real estate, because it's a great component. And Brooklyn College Graduate School of Cinema at the Navy Yard is a big example of that, an amazing example, and one that ought to be replicated in multiple different sectors. So that's one big piece of the zoning. We want to have some more flexibility on retail. So, ABC is there. It's great. They've got a very small store and, a huge amount of warehouse distribution space. But it's challenging. Like you couldn't do a sporting goods store underneath the nets because, under the M3, you could sell baseball bats, a hard good, but you can't sell a baseball glove, a soft good.
It also feels like ABC could use some co-tenancies.
100%. And that, so there's some co-tenancies moving in along 39th Street. There's a really cool company called Gumption Coffee. It's an Australian roastery. So it's mostly manufacturing, but they're going to have a small cafe. And but you're absolutely right. Some bigger players, and obviously retail is evolving very quickly. But that corner of 39th and 2nd facing Costco, and then on the other side of Costco in our building 1, that could be a very dynamic retail center. It'd be great to have a grocery store that serves Industry City and serves the broader Sunset Park community. Increasingly, people are doing business at the Navy Yard or at downtown Brooklyn or at Industry City or at BAT. Or in Domino. They're coming from all over the nation, all over the world. We want that. We want more tech companies that are going to say, hey, it's one thing being in a suburban, campus somewhere in California, but where the real action is in Brooklyn.
And at that point, you would think, at least in 10 years, at that point, there would be a lot more demand for housing around Industry City because,
Yeah. There's no question, and look, there's a lot of heat and debate and anger around issues of gentrification and affordability, and the issue when I was growing up in New York was crime and creating diversity in the economy and jobs. Now crime is at record lows and jobs are coming. But that's obviously creating economic pressures because everyone wants to come into the urban core again. And this is not a New York phenomenon. This is Cleveland, Detroit, San Francisco, LA. Like, it's happening everywhere, these pressures. And, the answer to that pressure is not stopping job growth or slowing it down. You want to continue to increase that job growth, particularly in job sectors that are accessible to people with limited educational backgrounds. But you're absolutely right. Like, the answer is, and this mayor deserves kudos for putting it at the top of the agenda, is more affordable and workforce housing. And we need to be much more aggressive, throughout that Long Island City to Sunset Park corridor at building that kind of housing.
Now, as Amazon announced their plans for a large footprint in Long Island City, Andrew predicts that it won't be long before the next industry giants take on Brooklyn.
I think what makes Industry City and the Navy Yard and now increasingly the Brooklyn Army Terminal so compelling, though, is the eclectic mix of the businesses and that ecosystem. So, I have no doubt that at some point a much bigger player is going to come along for us, whether it's 100,000 or 250,000 or it's a whole new building. But core to what makes us special is that, there are 500 plus companies on the way to 1,000, and the dynamism that you get from that, as opposed to just one company taking the whole thing. This is not the manufacturing of the 1950s. Those smokestacks are gone. Mm-hmm. It's looking very, very different. And what is happening along the Brooklyn Queens waterfront is primarily driven by the innovation economy. That broad range of making a physical, a digital, or an engineered product. Now, that's very, very broad. Having grown up here in the in the 70s and 80s when people were fleeing the city, we couldn't keep the talent here. The Brooklyn Queens waterfront was a wreck, unsafe. We had incredible over-reliance on the fire sector, from Wall Street, finance, insurance. And here we are diversifying the economy in these amazing ways, bringing this waterfront back to life. It's an incredible success story. But at both the Navy Yard and Industry City, what really gets my engines going, there are really two things. One is interfacing with the tenants, and I think there are 400 plus tenants at the Navy Yard now. There are 550 tenants at Industry City. That's up from 150 when I got there in 2013. There's 7,500 people working there now. That's up from 1,900 when I got there. That's the equivalent of 100 new jobs a month. So interacting with those entrepreneurs, those businesses that, these folks are putting everything on the line every day. And they're creating, they're innovating, whether it's a ceramicist or a software startup or a candle maker or a designer, a woodworker, and that's exciting to be around. I love that energy. And then, that's one. And then two, I love, there's nothing more exciting to me than seeing, people flow into the Brooklyn Navy Yard through their gates in ways that they hadn't, since the mid-'60s. And same thing at Industry City, when you see masses of folks coming down the hill, from Sunset Park and the surrounding areas, walking from the subway at 36th Street, coming under the BQE, which, for years and years had been this barrier. And many of them local, many of them folks who need these jobs badly to, move up the economic ladder in New York and deal with some of the issues of inequity that we have. That's the other exciting piece for me is the workforce component.
Tell us something that nobody knows about you.
When my younger son, Elliot, is now 17, I think was 10, he decided that he wanted to have chickens. And so we told him he had to make a business plan and a pitch to his parents and do some research. And, of course, we helped him a little bit. But, who's going to take care of these chickens? What kinds of cages would they need? How do they get fed? How do you find them? How do you order them? How noisy are they? Are they allowed?
In the backyard.
And ultimately, we ended up with having 2 chickens in the backyard, Buddha and Himalaya, for about 2 years. They were called Easter eggers, so they had blue and green eggs that were delivered almost every morning. Incredible tasting eggs. So we really loved them. Our neighbors tolerated it. But unfortunately, Ricky the raccoon found them about 2.5 years in, and that was the end. So there's a little Brooklyn story and something you may not have known about me.
I actually thought you were going to say that as a result of it, we're allocating a chicken farm space in Industry City that my 17-year-old is going to run.
I will say, though, on a more, serious point, the urban farming movement is something that really gets my engine going, and obviously Brooklyn Grange at the Navy Yard, which you've seen, is just extraordinary. They're expanding now down to Sunset Park. They're not in our buildings yet. They're going on the top of Liberty View, which is about 100,000 square feet. We will get to the point where more of our roofs can be used in that way, but there's a guy that's making honey on our roofs. He's got a beehive, and we had something like that at the Navy Yard. That kind of local sourcing, I think, is so important on every level: sustainability and supporting local, farms, etc.
Great, Andrew Kimball, thank you so much.
Thank you.
You're listening to Hey BK, the podcast about the people behind Brooklyn's transformation. You can find us at heybk.nyc or wherever you get your podcast. Please download and subscribe to all our episodes. I'm Ofer. Thanks for listening.